Hello, I'm
Hello.
Catherine,
I'm Daniela.
and we have a podcast. It's all about spiritual
Miracles.
Please join us.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye.
you. Bye.
Thank you. Hello, I'm Lorelei Drock. I've had a lifetime of spiritually transformative experiences, 6 of which were called what we call a near-death experience. My first one was at the age of 7. I grew up on 191 acres in rural Wisconsin. We had a lot of ponds because it used to be a quarry. And I lived across from my grandparents' farm and my uncle's. This particular day, my aunt and uncle from across the street came over. It was later afternoon. I believe it was spring, just given all the parameters of my memory. And they came over, and my mom was cooking dinner, and my brother came in, and he asked my mom and my uncle, if my uncle could take him down to the pond to check if the bluegills were spawning and maybe do some fishing. So, of course, being the little sibling, I was 6 years younger than him. My mom's like, well, I'm cooking. If you're going to go, you got to take your sister with you. And my aunt and uncle never wanted to be separated. My aunt was kind of that way with my uncle. So she came with as well. So they took me and my brother down to one of the family ponds. It was the largest one that we had turned into a swimming hole. But being that it was spring, the 2 ponds were connected from the snow and everything else melting away. So they went to the pond where the fish are to check if they were spawning, which is connected to the swim. I asked my aunt to take me to the swimming hole. So she took me down there through a pathway that's covered in trees. So you can't see each other from both sides. Kind of setting the scene here. So then my family had built like this wooden pier out of like pallets and posts. And you go down the embankment and go out on this pier. Well, I told her I was going to go out on the pier and look down into the lake. And so I did so. And I remember looking off to the left-hand side, but the sun was so bright and reflecting off the water, so it must have been late afternoon, that I was kind of lulling me, and I felt kind of like I was woozy and I might fall in. So I switched to the other side. At this time, my aunt was kind of getting nervous, like, I want to go check on your uncle. Will you be okay? And I'm like, sure, and I'll be fine. It's of note because people are always like, what? You're only 7. But we are a farming family. You had responsibility at a young age. And it was a different time then, this is late 70s, So she went to go do that, and she headed down the path. My next conscious memory is very odd because my next conscious memory was me being half underwater, screaming because I realized I was underwater and I couldn't swim. And then I realized that's the last of my air. Oh my God, if I breathe in, I'm going to drown. And then I'm like, oh my God, I'm going to die. Like, there's no way out of this. And the minute I said, I'm going to die, I was instantly out of my body, watching it sink, and my hair floating through water. I had long hair just like I do now. And as soon as that happened, I was like right above the pond, like at the tree line, as far as my conscious perception. And the first thing that happened is I connected with my brother's consciousness. And he must have heard me yell, there was all this stuff going on, or they had heard me falling, because his first conscious thought was, can I swim to her or run to her faster? And in spirit, I thought that was very funny. I mean, you still have your personality. I'm laughing, going, you can't do either. I was like, what are you thinking? And so as soon as I did that, the next thing I knew, I was connecting with my uncle who was next to him. And my uncle was freaking out because he's like, oh my God, we're responsible for her. You left her. They're going to blame us. All of these kind of thoughts. And he was heading back, towards where my aunt was. And then I connected with my aunt, who was like headed back down the path towards the pier, and she was freaking out because, of course, the whole blame thing as well, but also like she couldn't swim. And she's like, I'm closest, like, how am I going to get to her? So she was trying to figure this out in her head, how she was going to get in the embankment down the embankment without falling, because she wasn't She was short and stocky. She wasn't very graceful. So she was thinking how she could get there and get to me to save me since she was closest. So she was figuring out, oh, well, I can probably just hang on to that post at the end and I'm going to like sweep her in. I'm going to try to grab her hand or her hair or something, And she's like, I pray to God, this works. So we're both going to drown. I remember her being so fearful because she was afraid of water to begin with. But as soon as all that happened, next thing I was like miles above. Like I could see for miles the whole neighborhood, all the farms and everything. And then I connected with my mom's consciousness in the kitchen. And she was wondering if we'd be back soon, if we caught anything, what was going on with us, if, supper would be ready by the time we got home. So as soon as I checked on my mom, boop, it's like I left the whole venue. My next conscious memory is that I was in this place that seemed like almost like bright lights and rolling fog, and I could tell and I sensed that there was a being to the left of me, like that had guided me to this space. And I felt like a tiny little ant compared to that, because there was this overwhelming light. There was this bright light coming through, like what felt like kind of looked like you could hardly see because it was that bright. This archway, like way up in front of me. Like I said, I felt I was really tiny, and like there was like these steps, and there was this overwhelming light in what appeared to be like almost like I want to say a stone archway. And the light was like bright white, and then it went to like a bright yellow, then an amber, then an orange. But I mean, it was expansive, like it took up your whole view. But the thing about this was like there was this overwhelming peace and love. It was like a parental love times thousands. And you thought the light would like burn your eyes. You didn't know how you could look at it. And I could tell like there was like this being in the center of all this, but you could barely make it out. And I remember having a conversation, and it felt telepathic almost, with this being, like and I have a knowing, like I was shown different things in my life and what would happen, but I don't have like a real conscious memory of what those events would be, even though I lived in like deja vu for like the next 10 years after kind of thing. But I remember arguing with this being, going, no, you can't make me go back. No, I'm not going back. No way am I going back to that. You cannot make me. No way. And this argument felt like, if it was our time, because there's like a different sense of time there, like it didn't have like a sense of time. And so, but it just felt like forever once I was back. Like I argued and they showed me more, and then I argued and they showed me more, like, and until all of a sudden there was this big booming voice, like, and that didn't come across as telepathic. It was like a deep male voice, and it's like, the only thing I compare it to, because Spirit does this to me a lot, is the movie Truman Show. Like when he realizes he's in this fake thing, and that voice comes over the intercom kind of thing. It was like that, and it echoed, and it goes, you must go back. You have more to do. And I remember feeling so small. I'm getting chills now. Like, I'm going like, no, like, I'm sorry. Okay. Like there, I knew there was no arguing with this voice, but yet you still have your personality. For real, I was like, okay, well, they can make me go back to my body, but they can't make me get in it. like you can make me go back, but that doesn't mean I have to do what you're telling me. So the next thing, as soon as that happened, I was next to my body, and I remember seeing my body. They had brought it up onto the embankment and laid it on its side, thinking I might have water in my lungs or something. I don't remember coughing up any water or any ill effects at all, but I felt like with my body, but not in it. Like, and they told me I didn't really talk or do anything until the next day. Like I might have nodded my head, but I just, there was nothing. And no, they didn't take me to get checked out. I mean, you have to understand that mentality. My family was always like that. Like, I ain't paying an ER visit. You're walking, you're breathing, you're fine. That's just how it was. So it wasn't until the next day that I talked, and I told my mom what happened, and that I had died. But this was after, I have to say this, we had, like I said, a 200-year-old house, and my mom had all like the old Victorian furniture. So I was sitting in this, what they call a captain's chair at the end of our stairwell. And I remember my brother coming in and asking me about, the day before. And I said to him, and I looked at him kind of funny, and I said, why did you think you could run or swim to me faster? You can't do either of that. And he turned white, and his jaw dropped, and he started screaming for my mom, because he was like 13 at the time. He's like, what the? He's like, Mom, you gotta hear what she's saying. So that was kind of funny, but I just remember him, the look on his face, like it's embedded in my memory. Like like looked at me like I had four heads. But yeah, and so from there, like my family had, I didn't know it at the time, but other spiritual and other paranormal experiences prior to this with what we would call ET and Sasquatch and all this other stuff. So it's not like they doubted something happened to me. They were aware. Often people ask too, like, were you religious? Was religion a part of your life? We were German, so they were German Catholic. By the time I was the fifth child, so by the time I came along, she was tired of dragging kids to church and they didn't behave, kind of thing. So, my first year of schooling, I was actually in a Catholic school when this happened. But that was the only year I spent in Catholic school. I remember coming back from my experiences too, saying, "Mom, I'm supposed to be a priest." And she goes, "You can't be in our religion, honey." And I said, "Well, then that's not my religion. Nature is my church." I said that at 7. Anywho, but my mom respected it. Like after that, she didn't really force me to go. I was always in nature. Like I said, we had 191 acres, and I would have a lot of premonition dreams that started. And I could also like sense when people were about to cross over. They'd look like wax dummies, and I would feel really sick, like this weird pain in the center of my stomach, heart area, like 2 weeks before, And there was a few that as I got used to it, like in knowing what it was, that I tried to save. But that was so hard at 7 years old, even up to my 20s, when I tried to save my aunt. Because you have these abilities, and then you're like, why if I can't change anything, So that was very hard understanding that. And kids at school would be like, "You're weird, but in a good way," Like I was friends with everybody. I didn't, I'm not saying I was an angel after this, but there was some disassociation with my family because I came back so different. They used to tell me like I was the mailman's kid, or some people say black sheep, and I wasn't really that because I was the good kid, But I just didn't fit in. They were a farming, hunting family. Germans, they liked their beer, and none of that could I align with anymore, and I just didn't understand, and so it made it very difficult. My brothers got actually very abusive, so I also had like verbal and physical abuse going on after that, so my childhood was a little difficult. So then there was a lot of that, and at the time I didn't realize it because I was writing a lot of poetry, but it felt like other lives and other things, and I felt it so close. So I believe I was already channeling. I just didn't realize those things and what they were. Now when I read them back, I'm like, whoa, I know what they are. But then I didn't, and I'd wake up with weird things to write that were very like profound, and I wouldn't understand it. But that was kind of like where my abilities were then. And I was just very intuitive. It wasn't until my mid to late 20s that I really noticed things, and I knew things and picked up more abilities. And I entered the medical field. I studied to be a medical assistant, and I would just know kind of what was wrong with patients. I remember freaking out a doctor, and he came out of the room with the same face my brother had after my NDE, because I was like, because he was only 5 years old, and I was like, I'm like, "It's her appendix," and he's like, he looked at me, he's like, "Yeah, right," and he scoffed, and he went in there, and he checked her out. He's like, "I would have missed that. How in the heck did you, there's no way you could," he was like that, and, yeah, and, unfortunately, due to egos, there was an ego kind of thing between our urgent care and the, hospital, because they were both contracted doctors. They sent her home saying it wasn't, and unfortunately it burst, and she had to have surgery and a long healing process because they didn't listen. So that was that was a lot to do in my process, because now I'm a medical intuitive, that understanding those things and those dynamics within the field. Like even if you know and can see things, you can't always change the outcomes. But I didn't have another near-death experience until I was an adult. I had lots of paranormal and ET type experiences and Sasquatch experiences that I'm not going to get into for the sake of time. But so my childhood was filled with a lot of that type of experiences with ships and visits and all these kind of things. And my parents used to think our house was haunted, but I kind of now know it was more probably the Sasquatch, because knowing how they behave. But because things would move, things would be left, you'd hear people walking through the house and noises. So I had a childhood full of that. My next near-death experience wasn't until I was 28. And this one, there's not a lot to the experience itself, just leading up to it and after it. 2 weeks before, my grandmother came to me in a visitation. I was 5 weeks. Well, at this time I would have been farther along. But I was pregnant. And we had tried for a long time. And she came to me in this visitation, and within it, we were in my doctor's office. She showed me the doctor's office that I normally go to, and a calendar on the wall. And she said, I'm so sorry. This baby is not yours to keep. There'll be more, and you'll be okay, and don't be scared. But she can't, well, she didn't say she, but I knew it was a girl. I had an intuitive sense, and that, and she's like, you'll have more and it'll be okay, kind of this whole thing. And then she showed me the calendar on the wall and the date. Well, that particular date came and I started bleeding out. And my mom and my husband took me to the ER, where they determined I needed an emergency DNC. Because they didn't have a lot of background or a lot of things, they ended up giving me too much anesthesia. And it turned out I was severely anemic, so I bled out. I had to be intubated. They told me I had stopped breathing. I worked at that particular hospital by then, so the doctor was very upset with me the next day because I demanded off the medications because I felt absolutely fine. And this is where I know I almost died too, because he told me that he actually yelled at me because he knew me personally. He's like, fine, bleed to death. I don't care. I almost lost you last night. This is how you're going to be. And he's like yelling at me. But I had all the after effects. And later I was told that, through my other experiences, that I went home for healing. Because in my 20s, I had this whole vision prophecy of having my son. And so he was my rainbow baby. And the things that he would be capable of spiritually and everything else. And so they said I went home for healing to have these babies. And it's kind of interesting because they showed me, there was this generational, almost like curse. I don't want to say those words. Because my grandmother was in the Great Depression. My mother had 5 kids. During, my dad's company kept almost closing and different things. So there was all this fear about having more children and all of these things that was ancestrally within me that they told me I needed to have healed in order to have children. And the doctor kind of confirmed it, because they said my body wasn't in alignment. The baby's systems did not interconnect. So it kind of validated that, because they said my body had to learn to make a baby. And so the doctor told me if I wanted to have babies, I needed to try again right away. So we did, and I had my son, the rainbow baby, and he's had, and there was a lot of things with that. I want to touch base just a second with that, because I had all this telepathic communication with my son before he was born. And he would tell me about things, and he also told me, and that's the only time in my life, because I had autoimmune disorders and things, that I didn't experience any pain or illness at all. And he told me how he was going to be born and what I needed to do, because if I did it wrong, he would die. Because he told me he would be born with the cord wrapped around his neck twice, and if I pushed, it would kill him and all this stuff. I think I even did warn the doctor, but the exact same thing played out. And the doctor's like, don't push. I'm like, I'm not going to. He told me not to, And he was born, actually, I think he had what we would call a birth NDE. He was born purple and unresponsive and purple and blue. But they saved him. And I had telepathic communication with my other 2 children, and the second one was another difficult birth as well. And so she told me what to do and what not to do, because they told me if I ended up having a C-section, something would happen, one of us wouldn't make it. So I forced her out even though she was posterior. And it's a long story with that too. So that was my journey in between, my different experiences, was having those. My third near death. Excuse me. All of those after effects. Like, I was not upset. I kept telling everybody was upset for me, especially because we tried so long, and it was a girl, and there was 9 boys, and we would have been the first to have a girl, and we ended up being the first to have a granddaughter. But I had just wanted a daughter so much, and at the time, and so it was really interesting, the fact that, like, I was one placating and telling everybody it's okay, and I know this is for the greater good, everything is okay. And there was another woman that night giving birth, and they almost lost her and the baby. So right when we were trying to leave the hospital, that baby was born, and I'm all celebrating, where it made my husband just totally lose it, and he actually had a mini breakdown over this. So it was really strange that way. And I had a party book that night that I was supposed to have, and so I still had that. People thought I was like so, and there was all this healing going on. I was in this really high state of consciousness. So that's how I knew it was an NDE from having my first one, but I didn't have any conscious memory. Now I remember, like, I went into this circle of healing and was on this circle of my ancestors for healing. My third NDE was when I think I was 35, 36. And because of my autoimmune and different things, I had lost blood flow to my brain. I was talking to my husband, and all of a sudden, like, I feel like I can't breathe. Like, what's going on? Like, everything was like tunnel vision. And as I was saying this, I guess I was backing up, because he said I kept backing up away from him, but that's where I lost conscious awareness. And he said I backed up all the way into the front door, and then I fell backwards against it, hit my head. He said I started seizuring, like spasming on the floor, like I slid to the floor and was spasming, and then stopped breathing. And I was kind of sitting hunched over, like, in front of him and my daughter. But for me, the next awareness I had, I was sitting in this space with the white light, and there was, like, same thing. It's almost like the edges was, I always have like this mist around me. It's weird. It's almost like everything else is blocked out. And there was this being that looked like my mother, but I knew it wasn't her energy. And I remember this telepathic communication of, I'm like, you're not my mother. I'm like, you're not her energy. And they were very contrite. They were like, we chose this, to keep you calm, and to know that you were okay. And this is the only experience I had where I saw my own body. Was weird for me. We're sitting what I call Heaven City. It's where, like, all the spirit guides and everything kind of are, and that interact and watch Earth and do all these things. And I was on this marble bench with her, and I remember very clearly, like, she was rubbing my leg, like a parent or somebody that's trying to soothe you. That kind of motion down my leg, and talking to me, because I was, like, very distraught. Like, what am I doing here? What is this place? And she was saying that I was okay, and everything was okay, and that I had done enough, like, put in a positive balance, that I could stay here if I chose to. And I'm like, no, my daughter needs me. I had collapsed in front of her, my oldest daughter. And through this, where I say time is kind of fluid, I remembered, because I had done some work on this, I had a past life. I call them concurrent lives. People like talk about reincarnation, but I think they're all going on at once. I don't come back. Like, there's aspects of me, from my understanding and my spiritual experiences, there's different aspects of me having all different experiences, aspects of my oversoul, right? So this was one of them. And one of them happened to be a life with that same daughter. But I was her father, and I was coming home from work. I was a cobbler in, like, 1800s England. And I was coming over this cobblestone bridge when, like, two, like, we call them muggers now, came over the bridge and held me up for my coin purse. They had one of those musket ball type guns. And if anybody knows about old guns, much less muskets, they're hair trigger. Well, what happened is that they got my coin purse, but the one closest to me holding the gun, he wanted more. He's like, I think he wanted my pocket watch and stuff. And the other one was tugging on him, like, come on, we got what we came for, let's go, kind of thing. But because he jerked on him, the gun went off. And it shot me right under the right ribs. And then they took off, and my house was like 2 houses to the left, to the right, after the bridge. And so I made my way home and got, and I got in the door and I collapsed into my wife's arms. And my then daughter was my daughter here. And so she was at my feet, and I was telling them that I loved them and I was so sorry. And, I died in their arms. And my daughter today, had some memories of that, like having to live on the wharf and different things, like trying to survive. Because then, it was the men that brought home, everything. So they were lost without me. She was the same age, I think, in both scenarios. So it was weird. Like, so I think she was like 5 or 6. Maybe at the most, when I passed away. But having this experience and seeing it and feeling all of their feelings and why it happened, and that, because I remember them even yelling at the time, like, I'm so sorry, oh my God, like they did not mean to shoot me. And they were just desperate and hungry, and all of these things. So there was like this forgiveness that happened. So I'm bringing this up in the fact that ever since I was born in this life, I had severe pain there. I had been to I can't even count how many doctors, how many different types of tests, all the GI tests, all the MRIs, all the CTs, they never found anything. But after this experience and knowing what it was from and having that healing with these people, I never had that again. So that's a huge part of it. And because I chose love, like I wasn't going to do that to my daughter's soul again, like leave her at such a young age. Because they showed me, like, if I went and this happened, like she would be, like, they wouldn't have parents because of the things that would happen with my husband and all of these things. So because I was choosing that love to come back, I was given the decision to come back. And so next thing I knew, I was right back in my body, but I scared the crap out of them because they thought I was dead. And I just literally like lurched up like this weird convulsive zombie thing, and like, oh my God, I just died. And I started screaming, like, I saw my mom, and I was just ugly crying. I was like freaking the heck out. And I think it freaked me out more having that because, the longer you live, the more lives you affect, the more ripples. And I understood like how tragic it would be if I left, so there was like more weight to the fact of if I hadn't come back. And so I was just like so over the top emotional, like I couldn't believe this all just happened to me. Or that, and I came back with the understanding of like what she was talking about, like the positive balance, like the more love that you put out into the universe, the more positive the ripple, the more you've affected things in a positive manner. And I don't understand in this sense, but that like, that's the goal, like to do that. It's like, you're not judged, but the amount of love that you gave is looked at, and because I had done all that, I didn't need to come back. So I thought that was interesting. Because in the first one, I demanded to come to stay. By the third one, I was saying, no, get me back there. So, but there was another experience right in here, was more a spiritually transformative experience that some people believe, like I had more of another aspect of my soul come in. Some people call it a walk-in or something. It was right before that or right after that. I think it might have been right after that experience. I was laying on a futon. I think I had taken a nap. And I had been laying there for a little bit. I was awake. But all of a sudden, because I think it was like mid-afternoon, that whole narrowing where things were going black again. And then I was seeing like these colored things, almost like if you were watching a heart monitor. There was these colors going up and down like that of like a violet and a blue in front of my vision. And I had never experienced anything like that. I was freaking. And I was like, oh my God, what's happening to me? And then I saw this huge grid take over the whole wall. And it was the honeycomb grid. I know what these things are now, and I've experienced the different grids and things many times since. But it was this big, it reminded me of the light of my first experience. It was that bright white light with the amber around it, but it was this whole honeycomb shaped grid, like, like it was neon, it glowed. And no matter what I did, no matter where I looked, like it was there, and I couldn't make it go away, and I was freaking out. And then all of a sudden, like my body was so heavy, I couldn't even lift it. I was trying to lift my arm, and I couldn't even move it. It was like my body wasn't under my control in that sense. Like I couldn't move it at all. And everything went to like a pinpoint thing in the black. I thought I was passing out. And I was screaming for my husband, and he came, and it's like I can't move, I don't know what's going on. And then I couldn't even hardly talk. So this whole thing took, I want to say at least it happened over at least 10, 15 minutes or more. And then suddenly, like once my husband was with me, I started to come back out of it. But I was very, 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 very disoriented. I didn't know who I was, where I was, what was going on. So he took me to the ER. They ran tons of tests. It took me 2 hours to even remember what my name was. And I had no association and no real memories of the past. I didn't know what happened. They ran all sorts of tests to see if I had like a TIA, a stroke, a heart attack, all these things. I can't even remember how many CAT scans and MRIs I had in that whole period after there and afterwards. But they could never figure out what happened. But I was kind of like a completely different person afterwards. Like I was like little Susie homemaker, and I was like content to do this stuff. And I had like, I think I had all 3 kids at the time, and all this stuff. And afterwards, it was like, oh, I didn't like the label of marriage, or like that it was a contract, and like I understood all these words and all these things, and I didn't have the attachment to like the people or anything that I like really knew prior to this, and like most of my memories of it were gone. Like only the major like key points, if that makes sense. Like if you were to bullet point your life, those are the only things I could really associate to, but there was no like emotional attachment to it per se. So it was very different, and I was very different how I acted. My husband still's like, I want my wife back. Like I was very different. So that's why people say, well, maybe it was a different aspect. And now that I do the work with soul aspects and things, I would definitely say like a different aspect of my soul came in to handle these things. Because prior to that, I had lost my mom, and I wasn't handling it very well, the grief. And my husband had a full breakdown when my mother passed away. My mother, there was a whole experience where she had after-death communication and came and visited my son, who was nonverbal at the time and very much struggling. So this whole cool thing with that. But all this stuff was going on, and I had 3 young kids, and I just wanted out. So it makes sense to me, like my soul had this whole experience. Because things were much easier because I didn't have that whole attachment afterwards. And then my 4th death experience didn't happen, let me think. I think it was January of 2021. I was having, that particular week, just because I have a lot of autoimmune things, I was having some autonomic nervous system issues. I can't remember what triggered these. It might have been MSG again, because my 5th was MSG. So I kept doing these weird things where all of a sudden I couldn't swallow, or I'd forget to breathe, or sometimes I would just completely freeze up and not be able to move. So that happened leading up the week prior to this. And I didn't know why it was occurring. And I found out during my NDE why it was occurring. But so what happened that particular night is I went to go to bed, and I even said, I don't feel right. Something doesn't, I just don't feel right. But I stopped breathing in my sleep, and I don't know how long I was not breathing. By the events that played out later, I think it was a while, because the things I had to do to bring my body back. But next thing I was in this space again, but this was like, there wasn't really clouds, but it was just like this white space. And the person I come to know as my twin soul was in front of me. A dear friend was to the left, and they are both very much alive. And I sensed my husband and my daughter, who are also part of my soul team, to the left. And then I sensed all these energies and beings beyond them, but it's not like part of my conscious scope. I could just feel them, their energy, and like they were all, and it's just like iridescent energy, you know. But it was like simultaneously what my twin flame and my friend were saying to me, because he was yelling at me at my level of light frequency. I had to watch what I manifest, what I say, the power of my thoughts, all of that stuff, because I had posted. They were very adamant about what you write, and I had posted in the near-death experience group, Ned Matinia. It has the largest NDE group, and somebody had posted this meme that asked like lame ways we died, you know, and they were joking around. And they're like, well, next time I want to go like this. Well, I made the joke that I wanted to go like Grandpa, not screaming like the passengers in his car, because he died in his sleep. And and so they were showing me all this like I had created it because of, and a lot of things were hyper manifesting at that time, and I was aware of that, but I didn't realize why. And they said it was, like I said, I was in a higher frequency of consciousness. So things are able to be pulled faster from the quantum field into reality when you're at that frequency. So they said I had to really mind my words and my thoughts and the things I was creating. So I was what I call getting a lecture from the principal. But meanwhile, my friend over here it was like a simultaneous conversation. She was like, if you want that body, you have to get back in it now. And I'm like, no, I've prepared for this, you know what's coming, for many lifetimes. I am not missing a thing. Get me back in there now. So it's weird from the first one fighting to stay to this one, right? I was like, no, you have to get me back in there. So I'm like, how? And this is the weird thing. All the terminology was that my body was a vehicle, like a ship to experience Earth. We called it a vehicle. And I literally said, how am I supposed to get in there? How am I supposed to start this thing? She's like, well, you need to swallow. And so like I was connecting with my body, but not quite in my body. So I made it swallow. And as soon as I did, like literally I gasped, you know, like that, you know, like, you know, like, because they're like, swallow, take a deep breath in, you know, and then I was like completely in my body in that sense of like, I could feel it and everything else. But I want to say, you know, just from my medical background and everything else, I just shook. I think it was all the energy, or my body was going to shock. I literally shook. And I remember like coming to and being able to see the clock, you know, like it was a good 20 minutes that I just sat there and shook. And wondering like what happened to me, you know, I'm like, I died again, you know, like all this stuff, like I knew it. But like I said, there was all this knowing and all these downloads and all this things that flooded in over the next few days of the power of words, thought, intention, how we create reality. And, you know, and like the root meaning and the societal meaning and the energy that is fed words, like how important that is. Like I no longer say good morning, because that means to mourn the day, right? I always say good day. Like, I'm not saying being paranoid of words, but they were saying at my level of light, I really had to watch what I was creating. And after that experience, it took me a long while. I think this was the hardest one to integrate, just because of the depths and the different things I learned and I saw, and just knowing what everything was. Where my other ones were just like, felt like brief visits. I mean, except for the first one. I mean, I was there a long time, but I couldn't remember lots of different details of what they showed me, just that I didn't want to experience it. So this one was more about how reality was created, my part in it, how energy plays out. Everything was given to me in technical terms, like everything I downloaded. Like there was all this thing about the soul cloud and the fractals that make up the personality complexes, and how God split to do all these things, and being a fractal or like a star, you know, all these different things about what we really are. and how things are created into matter from the quantum field. And just so much of that it was overwhelming to integrate. And I didn't even speak about my near-death experiences. That was part of it as well. I forgot to say this, that I had agreed to be of service when I came back. They're like, if you're going to go back, if we're going to let you go back, you have, to be of service. And part of that, they showed me, that I would do these speaking things. I would teach and I would talk about my experiences. Because up until this point, I had not spoken about any of it. And that some of that came through in an experience I had a few months prior to that fourth death experience. I had what I call a connection to Christ consciousness. And I wasn't going to include that because we're just talking about NDEs here, but I started getting all this downloads from Yeshua. He said, don't call me Jesus. He's like, I'm your brother. And part of it was that he said that everything he did, we were capable of, that we were one and the same. But I had this whole experience with him in 2019 where I connected to Christ consciousness, and they showed me how the earth was formed, my part in it by free will choices, and and why things were the way they were now, and how Eden has always been here. It was a fallen frequency, and all of these things. And and that's where I learned the power of trees, because the trees and nature, everything spoke to me, and they call. The ones that I call the sentinels were at the end of my driveway in this experience. And, they were showing me, because they've been here since everything was created, how Earth, was this ball of gases, and how energies and different things from the universe and stardust and everything, was encapsulated in the way the Earth formed. And there was energies, caught within the Earth, and all these things that would play out. And that's where I agreed to be of service in all of this. And in that I was ugly crying. I was so apologetic. Oh my God, I'm so sorry. I forgot what I am, who I am, And it was like a collective you, see what free will, what you did with it. You created chaos because you were unaware of what you are and who you are and your power to create. And anyway, and they wanted me to start speaking. Well, I'm kind of a hermit. I purposely bought this house because it doesn't even show up on GPS. The last thing I wanted to do was be in the public eye, much less speaking about things like this, right? So I didn't, and that's also part of what played into my fourth death experience. They're like, you agreed to do this, and they even told me coming back that the story was no longer about Lorelai, that I was here to be of service, not attached to the storyline, because it wasn't about that anymore. I came back to do these things and to help people realize their full potential of being these limitless creator beings. So, yeah, so there was all of that. So then I knew I had to speak out. So the first time I did an interview was released literally because they told me to do this. It was December 31st. New Year's Day. It was the Jeff Mara podcast. But yeah, that was my very first one, 2021. And so I'm so grateful for platforms like this, to speak that out. And I know for the sake of time, my other two experiences, I will go through really quickly. My technical fifth one, because I had this whole experience at the IANS conference in 2023. Because I've had a couple of concussions through these injuries, right? Near-death experiences. And the plane had kind of landed on its nose. And everybody flew forward. So I whacked, it felt like my brain whacked the front of my skull. And I was having huge, pain and pressure within my head at the hotel room by the time I got there. Well, what happened was I was laying down in bed and my roommate was talking to me, and I guess I drifted out and she went on about her night. But all of a sudden I became aware I was in this dark kind of void or grayscale, and there was somebody there with me, and I can't remember very clearly what was going on, other than we were having this deep conversation, kind of like you do in the quantum space if you've ever done that with someone. And it was about life and different things and what was going to happen. And I just remember being in this black void, and then none of my experiences had a tunnel, but there was this huge white tunnel that opened up of light. And I remember going, oh my God, that's a white light. Finally, I get to go home. Because I figured if I'm seeing this, I'm really going home this time. I was so excited. And I remember thinking that, and I was like almost into the light. Like it was finally like in my vision. And I literally felt this grip on my arm and telepathically going, you can't go, you can't leave now. No, wait, you're not supposed to go there. And I got jerked back. And then the freaky part is like, all of a sudden I was in what I appeared to be my hotel room, but I had like no memory that where I was. But it was all grayscale. There was absolutely no noise and no real light. It was like looking at like a grayscale 3D sketch. And I'm like, oh my God, where am I? Who am I? Where is this? Like I was totally discombobulated. And I'm like, wait, I was supposed to be at the hotel. And then I'm like, oh my God, where's my roommate? And all this stuff, And it's kind of simultaneously, because I remember in my head like screaming her name. And next thing, all of a sudden the whole room was back to color. And she was coming out of the bathroom in front of me running like she had heard me. And I'm like, oh my God, and I told her what happened. I'm like, I saw the tunnel. I was going to go home. I think I died, all of the stuff. But the freaky part is, and I know I saw it the next morning. I'm not sure if they were there yet because I didn't even think to look, but I had 4 embedded fingerprints in the arm that I got grabbed on. And they were dark purple because they must have like really gripped me. And she saw it. And then there's a lady because this was at the IANS conference that I talked to. I said, I told her what happened. She's like, oh my God. And then she checked, she verified the mark. She's like, yeah. She's like, and the other NDE person said, only Archangel Gabriel can affect the physical like that. I'm like, well, somebody, I know I was with a being of light. I said, and they didn't want me going anywhere. But another reason, I was told it was another NDE was because of that. And the whole conference was kind of freaky. I started seeing people's light, like they were, I only saw one person like this, but they were completely Christed, like, and they could see it on me too. And like there was this huge globe of light around them, like how they depict Christ. And another person, there was like blue light trails everywhere they walked. Up until this time, I could never see that kind of stuff. And then the speakers that I facilitated, because I am part of IANS, I was facilitating speakers for the conference, and people who had just passed or were there to support them were all around them. I had never been able to see that. They were like literally joking with me, and I'm like, I'm trying to pay attention to the speakers. They're like, but she's doing so good. They were leaning on them and everything else. And one of them, I felt comfortable, and I said, there's this person with you. And they're like, oh yeah, that's my best friend. She just passed away a few weeks ago. The other one, her fiance had literally passed right before the conference. So like there was all this, and they were all with them, and seeing that. And anybody that saw me, they were like, you're like this wave of light. These one people were freaking out. They were like, you come through here like a wave of love. People kept stopping me, literally saying you're light. And I don't know why I didn't put it all together. Like I was still so much on the other side. And even when I also spoke at the conference, and I remember the lady going, you need to go down there and heal them, and talk to them. And literally they were like, Spirit was having me like touch them, and like I literally knew what was wrong with each person or why they were in front of me. So I was like moving through all these people like super fast. I'm like, well, it's this and this, and you need this, That was unheard of, so that's another thing that verified that I had this experience. So it was just unreal what happened to me at that conference. I mean, they're high energy frequency anyway, but this was pretty wild. And then I'm like, the irony of Spirit, because Spirit always likes to mess with me. They have a huge sense of humor, and I'm like, oh yeah, a near-death experience at a near-death conference. You wanted me to check out at a near-death, it was like kind of funny in that sense that, once I realized what happened to me. So now what would technically be my 6th one was in December, right after I got back from the conference. I had accidentally ate something that had MSG. So it was just like my 4th one where like I stopped breathing in my sleep. But this time I went to what I call the black void. It was like a velvety void that went on forever. It felt like, and I was so alone, but I realized, I was like, oh my God, I died again. What the heck? I'm doing everything you told me to do. why is this happening? What is going on? Where is my body? I was like really actually mad. And I'm like, why am I here again? And I'd never been to this particular void. Everything was always light. But this felt like almost the womb of creation, I call it, like the void of creation. It was love and peaceful, but not to the extent of my first one. And I had the understanding through part of this experience of why I was there. But as I was leaving this space, because I demanded my body, and I'm like, get me back in my body, I was yelling. There was a female voice this time, just like the booming male, but this one said, it was female, and she goes, there is only death because you continue to believe in it. And then they gave me all this understanding and showed me all this stuff, like I was creating the veil because I believed that like life ended at the physical body. So like the veil was me, that my loved ones had always been here, are always around me. The reason I don't interact or see them is because of my belief. But there was also like the understanding, like I kept creating these near-death experiences as well, thinking that was the only way I could get home. Like if I needed healing or whatever, that was, and so like, you're the one creating it, so I had to take that accountability. But there was also this whole thing about consciousness. I had the extent and the beauty of the love that I experienced in the first one. In this one, I felt that extreme loneliness of what we call God felt like without us, like a mirror to reflect itself. So he showed me how like he created this mirror of himself in order to because it had nothing to share its thoughts, its ideas, its creation with. So he created this fractal, and that fractal then wanted its own mirror because it had its own individual thoughts. And that's how like everything just started to fractionate into being. So I understood that like without that, I didn't exist. Like I was grateful for this incarnation to play this role so that consciousness could expand. And that not everyone got to have that experience, and that that was like how life created. Without that was me. I was this thought, this fractal of thought of this prime creator. And people are always like, I don't want this life, this and that, or I want to go back but I understood that like I was that creator, but I'm a thought form of it and came into being. So without that, I wouldn't exist, if that makes sense. So it made me very, very grateful for the fact that I was thought of. And it also made me understand like how we remember our ancestors, because when we do, we feed them that energy. When we forget these beings and these things, they kind of cease in that sense, So it was very, very profound in my understanding of how everything came to be and my part in it, and that I needed to stop creating death in my experience. So, but yeah, and through all of this, I learned, and especially having like Reiki attunements really opened me up to like my psychic ability, and had more awareness of it, and the medical intuitive and everything else. And I think I did that in 2022. So there was this huge expansion between 2019 and now. I had so many spiritual experiences and understanding and downloads and channeling, and just like my life just completely became this expanded state of being. And part of what they had me come back with, they said that we all carry like these codes. I call them source code and light codes for each other, and that our voices carry frequencies that can heal and create. So they told me like my voice has these healing frequencies, and I was given the ability to read other people's voice. Like I could tell that's how I actually read people, is the vibrations in their voice. And they told me that the future of healing would be sound and frequency. So, but that's kind of my journey in a nutshell. And I'm sorry if I took a little bit of extra time, but yeah, it's been incredible, and I'm so thankful. Like I said, people always are like, why didn't you write a book? I'm like, well, think about it. If I would have wrote a book after my first experience, I would have said, oh, how terrible it is, and they made me come back. Or by the, fifth and sixth, I'm like, get me back there. I did too many lifetimes to see what's coming, not to be here and experience this great wave of awakening consciousness. I do what I call, because one of the things they gave me was called Lotus Healing, and that was a download from Spirit. But I do what I call quantum shamanic Lotus energy, energy healing. So I do have what I call a healing practice, but I don't call myself a healer, honestly. I always say I'm a remembrance guide, because all I do is guide you to your own healing, because we all have the ability. It's just some people aren't aware of that, how they speak to their body, because that's a big thing I learned as well. Like, your body hears every word. It programs itself and your cells to the things that you speak and the things that you do and all of these things. So, my goal is to teach people to heal themselves more so than me being a healer. I mean, I've done, like I said, medical intuitive. I've even done some like psychic surgery and different things like that. Anything that's needed. But, with a lot of these things, if you don't teach the person how to heal, they're just going to keep recreating that in their body if they're not aware of where it's coming from, what lifetime it's coming from, or if it's ancestral. And that's part of the work I do, is finding the roots of those things.
Hello! Thank you for watching. We thought it was a very interesting episode.
Yes. And we hope to see you again.
Yeah, please.
Thank you. Bye.